This dude lived on the top of a pillar on a platform about the size of a yoga mat for 37 years without ever coming down. Let me introduce you to Saint Simeon the Stylite. He was born the son of a shepherd in the ancient city of Sis in modern-day Turkey in the year 390 AD. At 13, he became obsessed with Christianity, and by obsessed, I mean obsessed. He joined a monastery at only 16 years old. But apparently, he was so extreme in his austerity that he was kicked out. I had to look up what austerity means, but it's basically the spiritual practice of self-discipline, self-denial, and overall the rejection of worldly comforts. I don't even want to know what extremes he was going to get kicked out of a freaking monastery. After he left the monastery, he became a hermit and shut himself up in a hut for 1.5 years. During his time in the hut, he went the entirety of Lent without eating or drinking, which is 40 days. Shockingly, this act nearly killed him. But when he finally emerged from his hut, his achievement was deemed as a miracle. He continued this tradition for the next 26 years of his life. Do you really think he survived all that time without water? Food, I can believe, but water? That seems kind of crazy. After his time in the hut, he moved to a rocky slope on a mountain where he didn't have any sort of shelter or roof. He somehow took this even further by chaining his leg to a rock to prevent himself from leaving. His reputation began to spread throughout the region, and soon people were flocking to see this spectacle of a man. Honestly, if it were me back then, I'd have to see it for myself too. This dude was like the ancient David Blaine. However, all these people kept trying to talk to him, asking for prayers, blessings, advice, basically just interrupting what was supposed to be his alone time. So eventually he had enough, and he decided the best course of action was to live on a pillar?
Huh?
Simeon discovered a pillar which had survived among some ruins in Syria, and in the year 423, he climbed on up and just never came down. This first pillar stood at around 10 feet tall, and he sat on top of it for about 4 years. But once again, more people came to see him. So what did Simeon do? He just made his pillar taller and taller and taller. His second pillar stood at 20 feet, where he spent 3 years. The third pillar stood at 33 feet, and he spent 10 years on top of there. And finally, the fourth and final pillar stood at a whopping 60 feet or more, where he spent the rest of his life, around 20 years. That's the height of about 3 school buses stacked end to end, or 6 giraffes, or 7 adults. In total, he spent a ridiculous 37 years living on top of pillars without ever coming down. Food and drink were lifted up to him each day by his followers, probably by a rope and bucket system. And I know y'all are curious about how he did his business, cause I was too. I couldn't find any super reliable information on that, but I assume it was the same method of using a bucket. He became so famous that a double wall had to be built around his pillar to protect him from the crowds. In September of 459, one of his followers found him dead on top of his pillar, stooped over in a position of prayer, at the age of 69. Don't laugh at that. He is now commemorated as a saint in many Christian denominations. Simeon ended up becoming a trendsetter. For the next century, fellow ascetics began living atop of pillars throughout the Levant. They were known as Stylites, which translates to pillar dweller. One disciple of Simeon, named Daniel, lived on a pillar near Constantinople for 33 years. One Stylite, Alypius, was said to have stood upright for 53 years before his feet were no longer able to support him, at which point he lay down on his side and spent the remaining 14 years of his life in this position. Okay, upon further research, it turns out David Blaine actually did do something very similar to what Simeon did. In fact, he says Simeon directly inspired his stunt called Vertigo, in which he stood atop an 80-foot pillar in New York City without harnesses for 35 hours.
This is David Blaine's third stunt in New York in as many years, and as the local press has noted, the fellow has a certain genius for self-promotion. The reporter from the New York Times described him as the loneliest man he'd ever met, and for a day or so there's no denying Blaine's immediate isolation. By his own choice, he's doing what the ancients did, or at least the Syrian hermit Saint Simeon in the 5th century. He's standing on top of a pillar.
You can still visit Simeon's pillar in Syria today, although obviously it's not what it once was, as pilgrims kept taking pieces of it as relics. Also, in 2016, it was hit by a missile during the Syrian civil war. This is what it looks like now. Low-key, I would try living on a pillar. It seems kind of nice, just getting away from everything, just you in the sky. I don't know, seems kind of chill. Okay, question. How much would you have to get paid to live on a pillar for a week? Me personally, I'd probably say $50K. And listen, I know the whole point is to get away from worldly desires, but this is a hypothetical, alright? How long do you think you could be a Stylite for? Thanks for watching, guys! I hope you enjoyed the video! Like and subscribe, all that good stuff. Bye!